I'd like to turn the floor over to our featured speaker of the evening. You know who he is. If you were at the Lincoln dinner, you met him already. Roy Fox is a celebrated radio talk show host. He's the, for those who do not know, he's the historian, caretaker, and we don't want to say just caretaker. He's a historian, he's the lecturer, curator, and caretaker of the Rufus King Manor Mansion in Jamaica. And here, let me present to you Roy Fox, or The Fox.
September 17th, President Harry Truman in 1952 determined that September 17th is Citizenship Day because on that date this year, 229 years ago, our founding fathers signed the Constitution of the United States. And for 27 years, I have had the privilege of living up on the third floor of King Manor. And I'm inviting you to come and see me and take a tour so I can tell you the whole story in proper context. But because Citizenship Day is September 17th, the signing of the Constitution, the most important day of our year at King Manor is that day. We have a tent in the backyard, and this year 75 citizens from all over the world, 26 countries, became citizens of the United States. The paper says they are Americans, new citizens, sworn in at historic Jamaica ceremony. And then after they become citizens, we have a statue of Rufus King sitting, and we put him in the dining room, and we have him holding in his clammy little, in his historic hands, his notes from the convention of 1787. And we have a gigantic dining room table that is, I would say, from here to here and about from here to where you are. And we have a Constitution that size. And after these new, brand new citizens of our country, after they've been sworn in, they come into King Manor, and with Rufus King sitting there, they sign their names under the names of the Founding Fathers. There's not a dry eye in the joint. So if you would mentally register this, you're invited every September 17th at 11 o'clock in the morning, King Manor, to see this wonderful happening. One of the fellows afterwards came up and he said, I have mixed emotions. I said, why in the world would you have mixed emotions? He said, well, my wife was made a citizen about 6 months ago. And just a second here, let me finish. Thank you. They did it. My wife's citizenship thing was at a post office, and it was nothing. So this morning she said, honey, should I come with you? And he said, no, it'll probably be more of the same. And this is one of the most exciting moments. I said, you're going to bring your wife back, and you're going to get a super-duper Fox tour of the house, which has already been done. But it's really very special. Okay, I'm going to share with you just a few things. The event is that I'm going to share with you is on this tie. This tie was given to me by Terry Osborne. Terry ran the Queen's Council on the Arts for years. She served Helen Marshall as right-hand person at the City Hall. And for my birthday, she gave me this tie, which is the city of New York. It's Manhattan. There's City Hall here, and down here is Trinity Church, and across from City Hall is St. Paul's. I did a tour about 3 weeks ago of downtown Manhattan, how it relates to the Founding Fathers. And right across from City Hall and St. Paul's Chapel is the Astor Building. It's on that site that Rufus and Mary King owned a house before they bought the manor in Jamaica. The incredible, interesting thing is that they sold the house to John Jacob Astor. And the only time I ever found out what the house was all about is in a biography that was recently written regarding John Jacob Astor. Let me share with you just a few thoughts. For instance, he invested, and think about how much money that was for that time, $300,000 in Manhattan real estate between 1803 and 1806. New York was a city of 60,000 with few advantages over Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, or Charleston. Even though he had no idea that the raw land he bought beyond the city limits would pour millions into the coffers of his descendants, he would live to regret he hadn't bought the whole of Upper Manhattan. For Sarah and himself, he paid $27,000 for the spacious home of Rufus King, first United States Senator from New York, ambassador to England, and Federalist candidate for vice president in 1804 and 1808. The new home was at what happened? The new home was at 233, help, fix. 233 Broadway on the block above Vesey Street opposite today's City Hall. Besides rooms for the children, the residence featured a paneled dining room and a series of drawing rooms that opened onto one another. The property came with servants' quarters and stables. Nice digs for Rufus and Mary King. They mentioned that he ran for the vice presidency in 1804 and 1808. The fact is that 200 years ago, this year, the man whose house I live in, Rufus King, ran for the presidency of the United States. It works now?
Got to plug it in.
That's your opinion. Rufus King lost to James Monroe. But I want you to just get a load of his credentials for running for the presidency. He was not just a signer of the Constitution. He was one of a core group. 74 were called to Philadelphia, and as with today, many people don't give a damn. Only 55 showed up to save the nation by the writing of a Constitution to replace the Articles of Confederation. He was part of the core group that was in Philadelphia from the middle of May till the middle of September. And then, when they had all the pieces and they couldn't figure out how to make them work, they did what we've done ever since. Let's have a committee, and you're a volunteer, and so are you, and so are you, and so are you. The Committee of Style and Arrangement. Governor Morris put the quill to the parchment, signed from Pennsylvania, but he comes from Morrisania. He's buried at St. Anne's Episcopal Church up in the Bronx. William Samuel Johnson. His dad was not England's Samuel Johnson. He was an American Samuel Johnson, the first head of Columbia. It was called King's College. William Samuel Johnson had just been walking in his father's footsteps, just been made president of Columbia. James Madison, Broadway's Alexander Hamilton, and Rufus King, one of the 5 framers of the Constitution. He was the first United States Senator from New York. He had at that point served 3 terms. He would serve another one. President Washington sent him to England for 7 years to heal the wounds left over from the Revolutionary War. And yet, he lost when he was running for the presidency. But throwing some humor into all of what's gone on in our lives, I think Mort Saul is right. We've gone from Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and John Quincy Adams to what we've had the last 20, 30, 40 years. You know what this proves? Darwin was wrong. Okay, folks, laugh now. Figure it out on the bus on the way home. And even if you still don't get it for the first time in your life, you have had a decent bus ride. In that tour, I take people down to Maiden Lane, across from the Federal Reserve. There's a plaque on the building that says it's where Jefferson lived. It's at that building that Jefferson and Madison and Alexander Hamilton got together. Jefferson and Madison were slaveholders. They knew nothing about business. Hamilton was the genius of the system. He knew that financially you had to get this thing running right. And so they worked out a deal. They let Hamilton have his way, with the understanding the capital would move to the Potomac. On the corner of that street, it was called Smith, it's William Street today and Maiden Lane, Rufus King was living with his in-laws. When he found out what Hamilton had worked out, he cried. Because Rufus King was like me, born somewhere else. I'm a Chicagoan by birth, a New Yorker by choice. And those are the most insufferable New Yorkers around. We straighten all of you people out born and raised here by telling you, you don't begin to know how great this city is. And the people of the time, New Yorkers, wanted the capital to stay here in New York. They wanted the president's house to be on Governor's Island, which is still a great idea. So if we really want to do something exciting, let's pull the capital back up here, make a president's house on Governor's Island, and do it the way Rufus King wanted it to be done. All right. Also, in addition, on the tour, I took them to Trinity Church and the yard where Alexander Hamilton is buried. Alexander Hamilton is godfather to the two oldest sons of Rufus King. As a matter of fact, it's because of Alexander Hamilton that Rufus became our first United States Senator. But I wanted to share with you, to show the importance, we had a fundraising letter that was put out by our fabulous executive director. And as they were standing around the tomb of Hamilton, I read just a paragraph. King, who detested dueling, was horrified by Hamilton's plan to duel Aaron Burr, but there was no talking his headstrong friend out of it. Hearing from Hamilton himself that he planned to throw his shot, King begged him that he owed it to his family and the rights of self-defense to fire at his opponent. Another piece of advice Hamilton did not take. After the duel, King assisted in sorting Hamilton's financial affairs and raising money for his widow and children. King's sadness was apparent in a notebook in which he inscribed the name of his friend and the lines, "Each rising sun beholds my ceaseless grief, and night returning brings me no relief." King knew that with the loss of Hamilton, the Federalist Party would not continue in long existence. He said, there's a lot of us great followers, but he is the leader. I want you to open your Columbia encyclopedias. Now don't tell me you didn't bring, you told them to bring their Columbia encyclopedias, did you? Anybody bring, you didn't bring your Columbia encyclopedias? Yeah, no, I'm dealing with the real thing here, not your phony baloney thing, the electronic thing. All right, page 1478, Columbia Encyclopedia. I want you to take a look, right-hand side, the top page. Notice the name and what it says. King, Martin Luther, Jr., and it goes through all of the stuff. You can tell, very large paragraph. Led the boycott, the 55-56, Montgomery, blacks against the segregated city bus lines, and just goes on. The very next name, equally long, King, Rufus. Among other things, he helped draft the Ordinance of 1787, and was chiefly responsible for the exclusion of slavery from the Northwest Territory. You find it interesting that everyone in this room knows, as they should, Martin Luther King Jr., and how few anyone knows a major figure that somehow has been allowed to get lost in the process. At the convention in Philadelphia, because of his Christian commitment, he really fought with himself as to what you do with this slave business. There's a book out that's called Dark Bargain. And what the author does is quote a speech that Rufus King gives during the struggle that was going on as to what was to be done. And after he quotes Rufus King, he writes, "This was the most unmitigated indictment of slavery to date, and a call to both undo the 3/5 clause. You do know that adding insult to injury to the slaves, they were allowed to be counted as 3/5, which gave the South that much more power in elections and government control and everything else. To both undo the 3/5 clause and outlaw the slave trade. King had even threatened to withhold approval unless slavery ceased to enjoy a favored position in bargaining. If other Northerners had supported King, the convention could have cleaved in two." On top of that, Governor Morris stands up and backs up King completely. Again, the author, hang on here a second, Fox, you may have lost your place. And you haven't even had a drink yet tonight. Governor Morris, there we go. Governor Morris backs up King, and the author writes, "The delegates must have been stunned. Although both Morris and King had also enumerated practical reasons for rejecting slavery, here, for the first time, two members of the convention had plainly challenged the convention to place morality over pragmatism." And this man lived in our borough of Queens, and we know so little about his contribution. Now, I read to you from the Columbia Encyclopedia, the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Rufus had to live with slavery at the beginning of the Constitution, but it's almost like he got a consolation prize, because at the very time the Constitution was being created in Philadelphia, the Continental Congress in New York was passing the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. That's been called the third most important document. The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, because in that Northwest Ordinance, beginning in 1803, 5 states are created: Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And that early, between there and the Civil War, those 5 states were brought in and remained free in a nation of slaves. That ban on slavery was put there by Senator Rufus King. Incredible? You must come to the House to let me tell you the whole story. Now, the country begins functioning, and 33 years later, 33 years later, this Constitution, despite the slavery business, has planted seeds of freedom, and yet the Congress was doing back then what the Congress does today. They're allowing slavery into new territory for the first time, the Missouri Compromise. It's as though they said to Rufus, "You wanted your free territory up north. We're going to have our slavery down south." And they get it. And Rufus is the last of the signers, framers of the Constitution on the Senate floor. Who saw the motion picture Lincoln? Remember the scene? In the House, not the Senate, in the House, they're passing the Civil Rights Amendment, and as they do it, the doors of the gallery open, and the blacks, African Americans, walk in. That's our story from 40 years earlier. Rufus King has got Senate slaveholders, but the free blacks of Washington got wind that he was up to something. That's the reputation he had. And the free blacks of Washington filled the Senate galleries. February 11th, 1820. This should be alongside July 4th and all of the other important dates because of what happened at that particular point. And now, Mr. President, says Senator King, I approach a very delicate subject. Well, who can guess as to what's going to happen next? After all, Daniel Webster, no slouch himself when it came to public speaking, had this to say about Senator King. You never heard such a speaker. In strength and dignity and fire and ease, in natural effect and gesture as well as in matter, he is unequaled. Let's listen. I regret the occasion that renders it necessary for me to speak of it, because It may give offense where none is intended, but my purpose is fixed. Isn't this just like the man from Jamaica, Queens, the heavyweight, who has no interest in upsetting political apple carts, but he also has no intention of allowing what is both wrong and evil, something that will eventually destroy the fabric of freedom, to go unnoticed. No wonder that John Quincy Adams would write, "There's not a man in the Union of pure integrity than Rufus King." Back to the Senate floor, Mr. President. I have yet to learn that one man can make a slave of another. And if one man cannot do so, no number of individuals can have any better right to do it. And I hold that all laws and compacts imposing any such condition upon any human being are absolutely void, because contrary to the law of nature, which is the law of God, by which he makes his way known to man and is paramount to all human control. Do I have to tell you there's an outrage on the Senate floor with the slaveholders? I'm happy to report John Quincy Adams, Secretary of State, was there. He goes to his famous diary in his office and he writes, "I can't believe the speech I just heard by Senator Rufus King of New York." This is the line I love. He has the slaveholders seized with cramps. Now look, every generation talks funny. Moving down the physiological scale a tad, we would say Rufus King had become a royal pain in the butt. He lost the battle, but he struck the standard. And David Bryan Davis, who's not doing very well these years, but he spent his life studying slavery internationally, the Sterling Professor of History Emeritus at Yale, in his book Challenging the Boundaries of Slavery, he quotes what I just shared with you, and he added to it, so far as I know, up to that time, no statesman or political leader in the world had publicly made such a radical declaration of slavery's illegality. There are two founding father buildings at Queens College. There is the Jefferson Building, and there is Rufus King Hall. The one is the guy that had the dream, but couldn't push himself to make it reality. Just the reverse of that with Rufus King, bringing himself to fulfill the hopes that were there for us to bring about. When Abraham Lincoln was making his bid for the presidency, he didn't have a lot to say about Washington and Jefferson and so forth to serve as an example of what he had in mind for the future of this nation. In his crucial presentation here in New York, Cooper Union, the auditorium is still there, the podium is still there. Mr. Lincoln used as an illustration of those doing it right from the get-go Senator Rufus King, who steadily voted for slavery prohibition and against all compromises. By this, Mr. King showed that in his understanding, no line dividing local from federal authority, not anything in the Constitution, was violated by Congress prohibiting slavery in the federal territory. Isn't that something? We're working to make a difference, and I'd love to have you being involved, first of all, coming to King Manor, getting involved in the programs that we are doing. We had a young fella come from Gettysburg College. He was our assistant education director, didn't have a dime to his name, a lot of talent, didn't know what to do. I always love to have respect for young people, so I said, "Look, punk, you'll stay with me until you find out what you want to do with your life." We're out drinking one night, and he says, "Fox, you screwed me up." I said, "Pal, you ain't the first. You ain't going to be the last. What have I done now?" He had signed up at the graduate school at CUNY, 281-page dissertation on Rufus King, PhD in American history, and working at Yale, telling the story. He's got 3 publishing houses talking to him about the biography. The Missouri Compromise will have its 200th anniversary 2019-2020, and we're looking at that period of time to bring Rufus King back into the mainstream where he should have been all along. By the way, David called me about 4 months ago and he said, "Fox, I'm leaving Yale." I said, "No, you're not." He said, "I'm leaving." I said, "Unless you're going to Harvard, you're not leaving Yale." He said, "Have you ever heard of the American Philosophical Society?" I said, "Yeah, about 3, 4, 5 seconds ago." He said, "Created by Benjamin Franklin." He said, "We have 4, I said, "We?" He said, "Yeah, Fox. We have 4 buildings on Independence Mall, My office looks out on Independence Hall on one side, and it looks out on the Constitution Center on the other. We're going to do serious business there because Benjamin Franklin created it so that scholars and graduate students from around the world could learn all there is to learn about the great history that is ours. By the way, on September 17th, before and after, for about a week, they invite people to the Assembly Hall at Independence Hall. When you walk into the building and you look to the left, there's a great big room. It's where Jefferson and his committee brought the Declaration and all the changes were made and they voted. That's also the spot where the Constitutional Convention was held. And I had the opportunity, the week after September 17th, to tell the Rufus King story in that environment. And then afterwards, the guy says, one more thing Fox doesn't know, and it's a special for him. Instead of having our food and drink here, we're going to have it over on the second floor at City Tavern. Well, that was a treat for me, because after the Founding Fathers signed the Constitution, they went to the second floor of City Tavern and had lunch. And I had that opportunity, first of all, of the sharing, as I did with you tonight, the ideas, and then going over there as though I'm walking in the footsteps. I want to just leave you with some thoughts that I gave to the new citizens. And this is our program for Citizenship Day on September 17th. And I each year have an opportunity to say a few words. And just leave you with the finale. What an example Senator Rufus King sets for us in our generation. Win, lose, or draw, to be citizens looking to make a difference for good in this day and age. Win, lose, or draw, to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Not to be beaten down, not to be led astray by false and foolish ideas, not to be ignorant of the important issues of the day, but to stand up, to speak up, to be counted with those of the past who, through their efforts, have made this day possible. Here's the challenge. Do for future generations what has been done for us by those who have gone before. Less than a week after we were reminded of the horrific events of 9/11, we celebrate the birthday of the Constitution. The courthouse across from King Manor is named after Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, the first African-American Solicitor General and Supreme Court Justice, who once wrote, "The true miracle was not the birth of the Constitution, but its life." 15 years after the creation of Ground Zero, we can still proclaim, we, the people of the United States, in order to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do support and embrace this Constitution. A little snot-nosed kid looked up at me several months ago. He suspiciously looked the way I did when I was his age. And he said, "Fox, if this guy King is so important, how come I never heard of him?" I said, "Kid, because it gives me something to do." Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me something to do. God bless.
Thank you very much. And let's all join Roy Fox at the Rufus King Manor and next September 17th. Let's go there and get the full tour. Thank you very much.